The Psychology of the Wounded Healer, Turning Emotional Wounds into Inner Strength. What if your deepest wound wasn't a flaw but a doorway? From the myths of Chiron and Asclepius to the psychology of Carl Jung, this video explores a radical idea that healing doesn't begin when the pain ends, but when we stop running from it. You'll discover why our suffering isn't a sign of weakness, but a silent call to return to the self. This journey into depth psychology isn't about fixing you. It's about helping you see what's always been there beneath the surface. Stay with us as we explore how your brokenness might just be your most sacred invitation to live fully, honestly, and humanly. When pain becomes the beginning of true healing, not everyone who has been hurt becomes a healer. Suffering, although common, does not automatically lead to inner growth. The world is filled with people carrying wounds, but only a rare few learn to transform their pain into light. That is the fine but defining line between the wounded and the wounded healer, not because they are stronger, but because they are brave enough to step into the darkest parts of themselves. According to Jungian psychoanalysis, the figure of the wounded healer is not merely a therapeutic role, but a deep archetype of the soul, a space where pain and the capacity for redemption coexist. Carl Jung never used the exact phrase wounded healer in his writings. Instead, he referred to the wounded physician, the doctor who has himself suffered. What Jung emphasized was not the skill of the healer, but the experience of having touched the depths of suffering, which in turn awakens a healing power of existential nature. True healing never comes from the outside. No one can save you if the light within you has not been awakened. Jung believed that the one who suffers must journey into the depths of their own being to find the hidden light within the darkness. That is the starting point of the individuation process, the path toward inner wholeness. But not everyone is ready to enter the dark as long as we still carry resentment, a victim mentality, and the desire to escape pain. We remain imprisoned by our own wounds. Pain, then, becomes an unconscious cycle, a self-binding spiral with no exit. This is the kind of suffering Jung called neurotic suffering. In contrast to it is purified suffering pain that has been transformed through awareness and acceptance. The difference between these two forms of suffering lies in awareness. A wound can either drown you or awaken you, and the moment you stop running, stop blaming others, is when the path to healing begins to unfold. In Greek mythology, Apollo is the image of the perfect healer, untouched and unscarred, but such beings only exist in monuments. Real humans carry cracks, and it is precisely through those cracks that the first rays of light break. In no one matures in completeness. Every awakening begins in a fracture. A wound is not the end. It is an invitation. It is the starting point of the deepest journey, the journey back to oneself. Chiron and the tragedy of one who could heal others, but not himself. In the treasure trove of Greek mythology, there exists a half-human, half-horse being named Chiron. Unlike the wild, instinct-driven centaurs, Chiron was different, wise, calm, just, and immortal. Raised by the god Apollo, he became a teacher, a sage, a master healer. But he bore a tragedy that no miracle could undo, a wound that would never heal. In a cruel twist of fate, Chiron was struck by a poisoned arrow. Despite his vast knowledge of healing, he could not heal himself from that day onward. He lived in constant pain, endless suffering with no release in death. For he was immortal. It was this pain, not his talent, that turned him into the greatest archetype of the ancient wounded healer tradition. Chiron's tale is more than myth. It is a profound metaphor for the modern human condition. We often imagine healers as flawless beings, but Chiron teaches us the opposite. It is deep suffering that breeds genuine compassion. One who has fallen into the abyss knows how to comfort those still falling. No wound is meaningless. In Chiron's symbolism, the wound becomes the source of medicine. It is not just the starting point of awakening, but the lifeblood of human connection. For those who have suffered no longer judge. Those who have been torn learn how to hold the broken pieces of others with care. Chiron was more than a physician. He was a symbol of dignity. In a final noble act, he voluntarily gave up his immortality To save Prometheus, the one punished for bringing the light of consciousness to humanity, that sacrifice engraved Chiron's name into the heavens, transforming him into the constellation Centaurus, a guiding light for those who suffer yet still walk forward. Chiron reminds us of a simple yet difficult truth. Some wounds will never heal, but that doesn't make them useless for some times. It is the wound that makes us truly human. Asclepius, a child born of loss and the destiny of a divine healer, from Chiron's legacy emerged a remarkable disciple, Asclepius, the most revered god of healing in Greek mythology. But his beginning was not in light. It began with betrayal, loss, and a tragic death. Asclepius's mother, Coronis, betrayed the god Apollo while pregnant with him. When the truth came to light, she was killed on the funeral pyre. In her final moments, Apollo cut open her belly and saved the child from the flames consuming his mother. Asclepius was born of fire, from pain, and from a love that never fulfilled itself. Raised under Chiron's guidance, Asclepius not only learned the healing arts but inherited an extraordinary gift, the power to bring the dead back to life. He did not merely heal illness, he reversed fate, but that very power became taboo, for in the divine order, the boundary between life and death was sacred. Asclepius's act of resurrecting the dead angered Hades, god of the underworld. He complained to Zeus that order had been broken, and humans no longer feared death. In rage, Zeus struck Asclepius with lightning, killing him, a god slain for healing too much. Yet the tragedy did not end with death. Witnessing his sacrifice and unmatched gifts, the gods gave Asclepius a place on Mount Olympus. He became the only god to have died and been resurrected from then on. He stood as a symbol of healing that transcends the body and touches the soul. The rod of Asclepius, entwined with a single serpent, became the emblem of medicine, representing rebirth, transformation, and profound healing, unlike the caduceus of Hermes, with two snakes, a symbol of commerce. Asclepius's staff had one serpent, symbolizing a solitary journey through darkness, a shedding of old skin, and a return in new form. Asclepius was not just a healer of the body, he represented the human potential to surpass fate, death, and pain, to reach for something higher, something sacred. Yet like all healers, Asclepius carried the risk of losing himself when healing exceeds its limits. It is no longer salvation but a challenge to cosmic order, and sometimes the price of compassion is the life of the one who gives it. His story leaves us with a silent testament. The healer must walk through their own pain, survive it, and from there, lift others up. But in doing so, they must not forget they too need saving. When dreams become medicine, where soul and body begin to heal, Asclepius left not just a symbol, but an entire therapeutic tradition, one where healing did not come from medicine, but from dreams, symbols, and encounters with the sacred in ancient Greece. Those suffering from physical or spiritual ailments would come to the temples of Asclepius, known as Asclepia, to seek healing, but the methods there bore no resemblance to modern medicine. There were no prescriptions, no clinical diagnoses. Instead, healing was guided by individuals known as therapeutae, servants of the divine, spiritual guides, and the earliest image of the therapist. Patients underwent a purification phase, fasting, bathing, and cleansing the mind of disturbances. Then they were led into a small stone chamber to sleep alone, undisturbed in that stillness. They waited for Asclepius to appear not in physical form, but through dreams. The Greeks believed Asclepius could manifest in many ways: a man touching the afflicted area, a snake silently slithering by, or a dog licking the wound. These appearances were not mere symbols, they were the healing itself. In dreams where reason is suspended, and the unconscious unveiled, the patient faced the deepest roots of their pain. And in that confrontation, something began to change. This was a sacred therapy, a theurgical practice, not a discussion about gods, but an experiential union with the divine in one's inner life. Asclepia were the first centers resembling modern psychotherapy, but the wonder here was the patient dreamed, and the dream was the cure. Unlike the Oracle of Delphi, where people sought prophecy from Apollo at Epidaurus, the grandest temple of Asclepius. People came to dream, to enter a state led by the unconscious, and to rediscover themselves within it. After the dream, the therapeutai did not analyze like modern clinicians, but listened and, if needed, guided the patient toward specific actions, bathing, exercise, prayer, or simply rewriting their personal story. Upon healing, patients would sing a hymn of gratitude to Asclepius and offer a rooster symbol of rebirth, of morning light rising from the night's darkness. These stories were recorded by hundreds of patients, carved into stone, as living testimonies that dreams are not illusions, but the very place where restoration begins, in dreams. We do not act, we cannot hide, and because of that, they open the true doorway to healing. Death as the ultimate therapy, a spiritual journey to face it. In ancient Greek philosophy, there lies a paradox that is hauntingly profound. Death is not the end, but the ultimate form of healing. When Socrates drank the hemlock to end his life, he left behind a strange final statement. Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius, please. Don't forget to pay the debt. A phrase that may seem disjointed, yet holds immeasurable depth. In the very moment of death, Socrates thanked the god of healing, for to him, death had healed life's greatest illness. This is a revolutionary perspective. Death no longer as annihilation, but as a gateway to liberation across many classical schools of thought, especially in the philosophies of Nietzsche and Jung. Death is not merely something to prepare for, but a necessary part of inner life. Nietzsche wrote, "Many die too late, and some die too early, yet dying at the right time now that is true art." To him, death was not a failure but the final festival of fulfillment. Jung, too, did not avoid the topic of death. In his view, death marks the second phase of individuation, where one no longer turns outward but returns inward, confronting the unconscious and questions that reason cannot answer. He asserted that, without a personal myth of death, the mind would be swallowed by the black hole of meaninglessness. That myth need not be factual. It only needs to help us face the impossible. For those who once stepped into the temples of Asclepius, healing was not merely about prolonging life. It was a spiritual preparation so that when death arrived, one would not panic, but welcome it as an old friend. The temple rituals, ritual baths, hymns, the offering of a rooster were symbols, life extending to its final point, then making way for a different light to rise. In the modern world, death has been pushed out of life, it is hidden away, spoken of in distant terms, but this only deepens our confusion, for as Jung said, facing death is not a denial of life, it is the final step toward living fully. And so, Asclepius is not merely a god of healing, he is a gatekeeper, the guardian standing between light and shadow, life and death, and in the deepest silence of dreams. He reminds us of one truth: death is not the end, it is the final opportunity to heal the soul. The inner wound, a silent calling that leads us back to the self. Most of the deepest turning points in life do not begin with light, but with a crack. It's not something we choose, but something that strikes without warning, a psychological shock, a spiritual injury, a moment when life seems to collapse. Jung called this the starting point of individuation, where the ego is shaken from its societal roles and begins a conversation with the true self. Individuation is not about becoming someone new, it is the journey back to what has always been there, forgotten amid life's noise. Paradoxically, the door to the self often opens at the moment we feel most broken. Jung once wrote, "The individuation process usually begins with a wound to the personality and the suffering that accompanies it. This shock is like a calling, though rarely recognized at first. Like the mythic call, the invitation to the inner journey always appears in the form of crisis. We feel lost, lose our sense of meaning, and everything once familiar becomes foreign. But if we're brave enough not to flee the pain, we'll see it not as an enemy, but as a silent guide. The story of the hero from Hercules to Buddha always begins with a loss, and the dragon they face, in Jungian language, is the unconscious, the shadow, the unintegrated part of the self. When the hero overcomes the dragon, he doesn't just defeat an enemy, he reclaims a lost piece of himself. This is more than mythology. It is psychological truth. In each wound we carry, lies a forgotten part of the soul. We suffer not only because of the present, but because something within us has long been unheard. And that pain, if met with honesty, becomes a doorway back to the center of our being. But the journey is not easy. It is a metaphorical death where the old ego dissolves, making space for a deeper, more expansive self. We are no longer the person defined by society, expectations, or roles. We become a person in the process of rebirth. Healing, therefore, is not just soothing. It is an act of commitment passing through the wound to touch the true core of the self, and only then do we begin to understand where we break. Where we are most fragile is where the light can enter. Religion, ritual, and symbol, the ancient map for the lost in moments of deep collapse. When reason offers no answers, people often turn toward the sacred not as blind belief, but as a desperate attempt to find meaning in chaos. Religious historian Mircea Eliade called this hierophany the manifestation of the sacred. It is when symbols, rituals, and ancient myths become internal maps, helping the lost find direction in the maze of life. In the modern world, people mostly live in a profane state where time is linear, transient, material, and full of uncertainty. But our ancestors lived differently. For them, time was cyclical, and every year, every ritual was a return to the primordial moment when the world was created and ordered through ritual. They did not merely commemorate, they reenacted sacred patterns, connecting the personal with the universal. In the temples of Asclepius, healing was not just medical, it was a sacred rite of transformation. The patient fasted, bathed, entered a sacred space to sleep and dream. They were not merely cured, they were placed back into a sacred flow, where they were no longer isolated individuals, but part of a greater symbol beyond the small self. Eliade believed that illness, dreams, and ecstasy were ritual crises, not signs of disorder, but necessary stages in spiritual awakening. Like the ancient shamans before they could heal others, they too had to undergo a strange illness, a delirium, a journey to the other world. Only after returning could they guide others through the dark. This is not superstition, it is profound metaphor for psychological life in our most hopeless states. We need a sacred language, where symbol and ritual are not mystery, but means to engage with what cannot be named. The suffering do not need cold analysis, they need a symbol to hold on to, a story to live with, a ritual to step through. Religion, at its deepest level, is not a belief system, but an ancient framework of meaning that helps us comprehend the incomprehensible: death, pain, loss, rebirth. And when we enter that space, we don't need perfect faith, only the heart to participate. And something within us begins to shift. In our darkest hours, it is these ancient symbols: serpents, fire, water, dreams, sacrifice, that become lanterns on the inner path. For even when reason fails, the soul still remembers the way home. Hidden wounds. When the shadow shapes the way we live and love, not all pain is visible. Some wounds we dare not name, not face, not admit, and they quietly sink into the depths of the mind, becoming what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is not merely the ugly parts of ourselves, but everything we cannot accept: shame, childhood trauma, weakness, rage, repressed desire. Instead of confronting them, we wear the persona, a social mask, to be loved, to be accepted, to appear normal. But the cost of hiding is high. Every denied part seeks return through behaviors, emotions, dreams, or in relationships we cannot understand. And the more we push the shadow away, the less control we have. We think we're free, but we are ruled by what we cannot see. This psychological mechanism is not theory, it appears in what Freud called repetition compulsion. A person abandoned in childhood may repeatedly enter relationships where they are betrayed someone once. Rejected may spend life chasing approval. Early wounds, if unhealed, return in different forms but with the same deep pattern. How, through our unconscious choices, we don't know why we chose that person, reacted that way, repeated the same pain, but the unconscious knows and it tries to heal in a twisted way, recreating the scenario so this time we might choose differently. Here, Jung saw the role of the archetype, the primal pattern. The wound is not random. it repeats to awaken. And the shadow is not just the hidden part, but our sternest teacher, for only by facing it can we truly know who we are and love someone not from lack, but from wholeness. In therapy, the analyst and patient often fall into transference, where the patient unconsciously projects parental images onto the therapist. The relationship becomes a stage where old wounds are reenacted to be healed. And if the therapist is not self-aware, they will react, falling into countertransference, where their own shadow emerges. This is not just risk, but opportunity for both to enter the light, if they are brave enough not to blame, but to see each other as two wounded souls, reflecting one another. Thus, the shadow is not to be destroyed. It is part of the journey, a journey that is not easy but rich, with the chance to understand not just others, but oneself. And if we dare to enter it, we'll find the rejected part holds the deepest capacity for love. The meeting of two wounded souls, the true nature of healing in psychological therapy. It is often assumed that the therapist is a whole person helping someone who is broken, but the truth is far deeper, Carl Jung once said. A physician is only able to heal when he himself is wounded. This is not a metaphor. It is an archetypal truth. The healer does not stand outside the pain of another, they step into it with them. Healing is not a one-way act. It is a co-presence, a meeting between two wounded souls, one conscious enough not to turn away, the other brave enough to open up the genuine presence of someone who has walked through darkness, not by reading, but through their own heart, has an extraordinary power. It needs no grand words. Mere authentic presence is enough to unlock layers long sealed in the other's mind. Jung emphasized, more than half of therapy lies not in technique, but in the analyst's willingness to face themselves within the patient's reflection, for it is what has wounded the therapist that allows them to understand others more deeply. When a patient becomes angry, cold, accusatory, or silent, the therapist must not react from ego, but treat it as a mirror. The patient may be unconsciously reenacting old wounds, and if the therapist can remain calm and compassionate, something begins to shift. This is why healing is a dangerous journey for both. The therapist may be re-wounded, or worse, may unconsciously use the patient to heal a shadow they've not faced themselves, if not alert. They fall into what Jung called inflation, the illusion of being a savior. This is the trap of the Asclepius archetype, the healer who crosses the line between life and death, and is punished by Zeus. The therapist is not a god. They are a wounded person learning to carry their wound as a gift. Likewise, the patient cannot rely solely on the therapist sooner or later. They must realize that true healing lies not outside, but within the therapist is only a guide, a psychopomp, a soul guide through darkness. But it is the patient who must strike the final blow against their own dragon. That's why Jung said, analysis is a dialogue between two people. No one is higher, no one is whole, just two people sitting across from one another, and if they're honest enough, something miraculous may happen, not salvation, but a moment of truth, powerful enough to lift them both from the abyss. For healing does not happen when we hide our wounds, but when we allow someone to see them and they stay, where the light enters, the crack as a doorway to the self. There is a quote often cited on the healing journey, "It is through the cracks that the light enters." Behind this image lies a profound truth in Jungian psychology. Wounds are not flaws to be fixed, but doorways to the self, the sacred, whole center of the soul. The self is not the rational ego we use to navigate daily life. It is the deepest part beyond identity, roles, personality. It is who we were born to be, not by social standards, but by a deep, inner vitality. But to reach the self, one must walk through a land of shadows where the ego breaks down, where old values are questioned, where personal pain becomes a universal symbol of the human journey. A wound is a signal that something within us has awakened, and at that very place, transformation begins, like the alchemist. The healer does not discard the wound, but works with it, refines it, transmutes it into gold. Jung called this process an antiodromia, the return of the opposite meaning. Our deepest pain can lead to our highest potential if we are brave enough not to run. No individuation journey is safe. Every breakdown is an ego death that clears the way for the self, and the paradox is what we call collapse may be exactly what allows us to be reborn in the crisis. In the thickest darkness, the soul begins its return. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means don't run from pain, enter it. Eyes open, heart trembling, and in that darkness, something miraculous happens, not in flashes of light, but in the silent space where we stop fighting and begin to listen. Then, the light comes not from outside, but from within the center of darkness, a light not blinding or grand, but enough to illuminate the path back to the real self. No one can walk it for us. No technique can shortcut it. But if we sit with the pain, hold the wound as sacred, we'll see it is where we broke that our true humanity begins. And that is the deepest healing we can receive, not the erasure of the wound, but learning to live with it as a part of us, as proof that we have loved, lost, broken, and still live more deeply, more truthfully, and closer to the self than ever before. Inner strength is born from pain, how to control yourself when you cannot control life. There are moments in life when everything slips beyond our control. You can't change the world, can't change others, can't avoid getting hurt. But in those moments, one question becomes vital. Can you control yourself when the external is chaotic? The only person you can manage is yourself, your emotions, thoughts, reactions, and choices. And that is not simple. It requires true inner strength. We often confuse strength with dominance, calmness with coldness, control with repression. But inner strength is not about suppressing pain. It is about staying grounded, even while in pain. It's not about never falling. It's about rising with intention each time we break. In-depth psychology. This is the ability to integrate the shadow, to accept weakness, wounds, and rebellion within us, without letting them dictate our actions. A person with inner strength does not lack darkness. They have a conscious relationship with it. They know where it lives, when it speaks, and they choose not to react by impulse, but by understanding. This strength is often forged through crisis when wounded. If we stay with the pain rather than run, a new inner space opens. It's a place where emotions no longer rule, but are observed as companions in therapy. Transformation doesn't come from eliminating negative emotions, but from learning to be with them without drowning. Jung wrote, "He who does not confront his shadow will be ruled by it in some other way." This is a warning, but also guidance. Inner strength is born from facing, not merging with suffering, when you are no longer a victim of emotion, but an observer guiding it. You have matured. The world may not change. Others may continue to hurt you, but if within you exists a steady point, a stillness, born of deep awareness, then no one can take your inner freedom. That is where true healing begins. Not when you control the world, but when you've learned to control yourself. This is not idealism. It's a skill shaped through experience, reflection, and the courage not to turn away from what's happening inside you. And so, bit by bit, you build something. No one can give you an inner power unconditioned by circumstance, forged from the very pain that once tried to break you. Wounds are not mistakes. Dismantling social misconceptions about healing and psychology. In modern society, we live in a strange paradox. Everyone is wounded, but few dare admit it. Psychology has become a private affair, as if seeking therapy is a sign of weakness. People readily visit doctors for physical pain, but hesitate when the soul breaks. This reflects not only silent cultural stigma, but a deep misunderstanding of what healing truly is. Wounds are not failures. They are an essential part of the human journey. Every crack in the soul holds a story of the past, of the longing to be loved, of the fear of being abandoned, judged, or made invisible. And if not acknowledged with care, those wounds don't disappear, they merely transform, hide, and silently shape how we think, live, and love. Jung called this living in the shadow, a life where pain is hidden behind smiles, anger buried under fake kindness, and memories avoided, but the shadow doesn't vanish when ignored. It grows until it spills out through behavior, dreams, relationships, or mental breakdowns. Society praises positivity, success, strength, but few are taught this. Vulnerability is human, and facing it is an act of courage. Healing isn't becoming perfect, it's becoming real. And sometimes that truth is fragile, uncomfortable, but it is the only path to inner freedom. We need a shift in how we see psychology, not as something for the unstable, but as a map for those brave enough to live truthfully on that path. The therapist is not a key holder, but a companion. And everyone, regardless of circumstance, has the right to walk it, without shame, without hiding, without permission. We must break the myth that wounds mean something is wrong in truth. Wounds are signs of a soul still alive, still yearning for connection, still hoping to be understood, and that is the beginning of healing when we stop seeing our cracks as shameful and begin to see them as essential parts of who we are. Healing is not the privilege of the enlightened. It is a primal need of every soul that has ever been hurt. And the sooner we drop the mask of, "I'm fine," the sooner we touch something more real, more human, not perfect, but deep, emotional, and alive. And from there, real healing begins. Not in trying to be okay, but in allowing ourselves to break, and from that, be reborn as who we truly are. The wound is where the soul is called home, looking back on the journey from Chiron, Asclepius, to Socrates and Jung. We encounter a quiet but undeniable truth. Every great healer has been wounded, and no one walks through life without breaking at least once. But instead of letting the wound paralyze them, they turned it into a path that was not easy, not glorious but real, and one that led back to the deepest essence of being human, pain. If we allow it to become a teacher, will show us compassion fracture. If we resist the urge to immediately patch it up, will reveal that fragility is part of strength and death. If we dare to face it, will make us cherish every moment of life within every wound. There is a message waiting to be heard in every crack. There is a light trying to break through. Jung once said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Rejection only causes pain to return in different forms, more violent, more twisted. But if we dare to sit with our pain, dare to enter the darkness without bringing a light, something strange will happen from within that darkness. An inner light will ignite not from anywhere else, but from within ourselves. Healing, ultimately, is not a destination. It is a way of living honestly with what we feel. A way of living that knows we are not perfect, but we can be truthful. A way of living that does not seek to escape the wound, but to walk with it as a quiet, wise companion. Because a wound does not make you weak, it makes you human. And it is in that place, the place you thought everything was lost, that your soul is called home, not to begin again as before, but to live for the first time, truly.